Hey everyone, we are here with the answer key for the Unit 7 practice test. I've written it out so I can go through it more quickly. I want to get this done as soon as possible. All right, is this a function? It's all about thinking of the vertical line test. That will ensure that for every input, your inputs are your x's, you won't get two things happening. Two possibilities is no good for functions. So this fails right there. That's the only place. It's okay to have open circles above closed circles. It's okay to stop. It's okay even to have gaps, but it's not okay to have overlap. So I couldn't have something like that. All right, there's a problem there. Over here, that's okay to have a gap. There's no value for 3, but there's a value in the infinite direction in negative land, and there's infinitely many possibilities in positive land. It's only at 3 that we don't get anything, so we can't have an input there. So our domain then is all real numbers. That's the abbreviation for real numbers, except that x can never be 3, okay? For the next one, ordered pairs, it's all about just making sure you don't duplicate your input. If I had a 3 appear again, I better have the same output. It's okay to double up if you have the same input, but you can't have, as I said before, two different outputs for your input. If you want to think about graphing these, again, just graph them and think vertical line test. That will tell you. But rather than saying like 1 through 5, I wouldn't probably take off a lot of points. It's better just to simply list what are your allowed inputs. We have no information that like 2.5 is okay. I can't necessarily plug in pi, all right? Over here, we're just going to verbal description. There's multiple ways to represent functions. Sometimes we just use words. A person's fingerprint, that's a positive ID. No two are alike, so there's no way that we could get two different outputs. A person can't have two different dates of birth, all right, as far as we know. So your inputs then are all people that have fingerprints. In problem 2 here, we're just got two functions. We'll keep them simple. Putting one inside the other, you're just doing g of 1 first, you get 3, then you take and do f of 3, that's f of g of 1. Go carefully, crunch those numbers, you get 23 coming out. We sometimes put one function inside another function and keep them in function notation with x's as variables. Just very carefully do your PEMDAS rules, distribute, and you'll get that as g of f of x. I didn't give you much room to work here, I'm sorry. G of x just means it sort of loops in on itself. So you plug in a number and you'd multiply it by 7, take away 4. Then you'd multiply that by 7 and take away 4. That would be the same as just plugging it in once and getting that, okay? This one's a little bit more complicated. I apologize for the very little room for the algebra. You just want to make sure that you know how to FOIL that on the real test. I'll try not to make it too complicated, but you FOIL all out, you bring in the 3, you take away the 4, bada bing, bada boom, you got the answer, all right? Solve by factoring. This is a potential box method, or however you want to do that. Again, not a lot of room to squeeze it in on a separate sheet of paper. You probably would do this, but you multiply your first and your last terms, you get this big 180. It's negative, so we're looking then for two numbers that multiply to make 180 that subtract to make that 31. Turns out 36 times 5 multiply to make 180, but subtract to make 31. So I plug them in my box method, and then I factor out the common term, and I get x minus 3 times 12x plus 5, okay? There's a good video explaining factoring if you need to review that. Here we're solving by extracting a root. Again, we're peeling away the layers. X only appears once with the squaring, so I just take away each layer. Take away the 31, then take away the 10 by dividing, and then I take away the squaring by square rooting both sides. Then I make sure I simplify the radical. I take from 98 out the factors. I've got doubling up on 7s, so it's 7 radical 2 when I simplify. Plus or minus 7 radical 2 is equal to 2x minus 5. Then I brought it over here and put it in the order we're sort of more used to writing it. Then I take away the 2. No Schoology answer, just like that, you're good to go. Okay, fill in the blank with a quantity that will make the quadratic a perfect square. We're just practicing completing the square. So if you're given x squared minus 5x, remember the rule is you divide by 2 and then you square it. 5 divided by 2 is 5 over 2. Don't go decimal. Keep it as a fraction. Square the top, square the bottom, 25 over 4. Okay? Graph the 5 points of the parabola. You'll see this is an adjusted version of this problem from the practice test online. I think that this is a better way of reflecting what you need to know. It's the same problem basically, because when you get to points 4 and 5, you need to use the quadratic formula, okay? So just to get started with the 5 points, you've got the minus b over 2a rule. That will tell you the axis of symmetry. Very carefully plug in your a and your b, and you get 12 over 6, which is 2. So the axis of symmetry is right down here on the x equals 2 line. It's a mirror image, so we then plug in the 2 because we want to know where we are up and down that line. We're at negative 22, so that's the vertex. This is the easiest point in the whole universe. You plug in 0, it just everything drops out, but you're negative 10. Well, I know that if it's symmetrical, I can flip this line from 0 to 2 is 2, so I go 2 more out to 4. I keep it at negative 10. Then the last thing I do is the quadratic formula to find these points. It's no calculator section. You can keep it in exact form. You could also take one of these calculators, type it in, get a decimal. I won't do that now because I think you know how to do that. Or you should know how to do that. 7 here, a rectangle's length is 6 centimeters more than 3 times its width. Okay, this is kind of a pain in the butt, but if you break it down, there's W, there's 6 more than 3W. We go Pythagoras on it. 50 squared is the hypotenuse. That's W squared. Again, we're going to FOIL this out very carefully. Don't get psyched out by big numbers. Just grind it out. You're in high school. You can do it. W squared plus 9W squared is 10W squared. I'm putting this in standard quadratic order. 36 minus 2,500. Again, don't be psyched out by big numbers. It just is what it is. If you're clever, you might notice you can take out a 2 from everything. I wasn't very clever about doing it in the first place, made a little mistake, but I got it. 5, 18, and negative 12, 32. Plug those into the quadratic formula. Get out that calculator. Take a deep breath. And you are going to be able to break this all down and get negative 18 plus or minus square root of 24, 964 over 10. And when you work it all out, believe it or not, it all drops out and you get 14. So if this side is equal to 14, then this is 48. Multiply them and you get your area 672. Wow. All right. This guy, calculator problem. Okay, I've taken the time to put them in advance. Turn that on. Look at our stat list. There it is. There's our graph. Okay. I'm going to do quad reg, so I just hit stat, go over to calculate. Choose option number 5. You guys are pros at this. There's my quad reg. Okay, I could write that down. Even better, if I go back to my y equals, this is how I pasted in on an old calculator. I hit vars, and then I go down to option 5, over 2 clicks to equation, hit enter, and now it's there, and now it's there. I obviously need to see a little bit more, so I go to the window. I'm going to make my y maximum up to about 10. Hopefully that'll show it up. There we go. I want to find that little spot up at the top. I'm going to do second, trace, and then find the maximum. 4. Just make sure you follow the directions. The left boundary, I'm to the left-hand side. Now I need to go to the right-hand side of my maximum point. Definitely on the right-hand side. I got the pinchy arrows. I hit enter, and there's basically my answer. That when x is 322.33, 322 and 33 cents, I'll get a profit of, what is that, about 7.58. 758, and what is it in millions? 7,580,000, something like that. I could copy out more decimal places, but in the interest of time. So I would sketch a graph, and then I would label